In the rugged foothills of Wyoming's Wind River Range, Margaret Foster tends to her cattle with the quiet grace of a woman who has known both profound love and devastating loss to her neighbors. She's the soft-spoken widow of a decorated Navy SEAL living alone with her memories and her husband's medals. What the Rising Storm Motorcycle Club is about to discover, however, is that Thomas Foster trained his wife in more than just ranch management before his final mission for her. In their decade together, he prepared her for a world where threats don't always come from distant shores. And now those lessons are about to save not just her ranch, but the entire valley. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in on, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind carries the scent of snow as Margaret completes her evening inspection of the property's perimeter. Her boots leave precise impressions in the frost covered ground, each step placed with unconscious purpose. To anyone watching, she appears to be performing routine ranch maintenance, but her eyes continually scan the distant ridge line where 3 motorcycles had appeared earlier that day. Years of Thomas's training have become second nature. Analyze terrain, identify choke points, maintain awareness of potential threats while appearing completely at ease. The Rising Storm MC had arrived in Wind River Valley 6 months after Thomas's funeral there. Chrome and leather, an unwelcome intrusion in this quiet ranching community. At first, they claimed to be simply passing through, looking to establish a legitimate business presence. But Margaret had recognized the predatory calculation behind their leader's smile, had seen how they studied the properties along the valley with more than casual interest. Thomas had taught her to read people just as he taught her to read terrain, and these men carried themselves with the false confidence of predators who had never faced real resistance. Inside the ranch house, a folded American flag occupies a place of honor beside Thomas's silver star, and distinguished service. Cross the medals tell only part of his story. The public part, what they don't reveal, are the countless nights he spent teaching Margaret everything he knew about tactical awareness, about reading terrain, about identifying threats before they fully materialized. The world's changing Maggie, he would say, his voice carrying the weight of missions he could never fully describe. Sometimes the greatest service we can provide is preparing those we love to stand strong. Without us, those words had seemed like unnecessary precaution during their years together. Now, watching another black SUV cruise slowly past her property, Margaret understands the depth of Thomas's foresight. He hadn't just been teaching her to protect herself, he'd been preparing her to protect everything they'd built together, everything they believed in. A truck engine growls in the distance, drawing Margaret's attention to the Western Access Road, her spotting scope, a gift from Thomas on their 5th anniversary. She observes Jack Bennett's vehicle approaching. The elderly rancher's usual careful driving is replaced by barely controlled speed, and even from this distance, she can see the tension in his posture. Something has happened, something that's finally pushed their quiet community toward a breaking point. They're moving faster than we thought, Jack announces as he exits his truck, his weathered face tight with concern. Sally Mitchell's placed the old Anderson spread. Now the Watson family, all sold for half what they're worth. Rising Storms got some kind of development company making offers nobody can refuse. Margaret studies her neighbor's expression, noting the barely concealed fear. Can't refuse or aren't allowed to refuse. Both Jack's hands tremble slightly as he accepts the coffee she offers. They started subtle, but now equipment failures, mysterious accidents, livestock going missing. Sheriff Crawford says his hands are tied, claims the MC's got all the proper permits, all the right paperwork. The sound of motorcycles echoes off the valley walls, growing closer. Margaret's hand brushes unconsciously against the hidden compartment beneath the porch swing where Thomas had installed a gun safe. During their first year of marriage, they're getting bolder. She observes, quietly remembering Thomas's lessons about how predators often mistake patience for weakness. They're coming for your place next. Maggie, Jack's voice, carries genuine concern. Word is their development plan center on this section of the valley. Something about the old mining access roads, the remote location, the way they're operating. And it's not just about land, they're building something bigger. 3 bikes roar past the ranch entrance, their riders conducting what appears to be a casual drive-by, but Margaret notes their practice formation, the way they study key tactical positions, the barn's upper windows, the elevated pasture that provides clear lines of sight, the concealed approaches Thomas had pointed out during their years together. She recognizes military training in their movements, the kind Thomas had warned her about, skills meant for protection being used instead for intimidation. Jack Margaret says, softly remember that storage unit Thomas and I rented in town, the one we never talked about. She meets her old friend's gaze, seeing understanding dawn in his eyes. I think it's time to take inventory. Through her spotting scope, she watches the bikers disappear around the bend, their dust trail rising like a signal in the evening light. Rising Storm thinks they're about to pressure a grieving widow into submission. Instead, they're about to learn why Thomas Foster spent years preparing his wife for a world where threats don't always wear foreign uniforms, and why some of America's enemies learned too late that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who appear the most vulnerable. Inside the house, Margaret opens a hidden panel behind Thomas's medals, revealing a tactical notebook filled with his precise handwriting. If you're reading this, Maggie, the first page reads, "It means the skills we practiced aren't just precaution anymore. Remember what I taught you. Strength isn't about domination. It's about protecting what matters, no matter the cost." Dawn paints the Wind River Valley in shades of amber as Margaret reviews Thomas's tactical notebook, its pages filled with detailed observations about the ranch's defensive capabilities. Her husband had seen potential threats long before the essay materialized, analyzing every aspect of their property through the lens of his military experience. Terrain shapes conflict. He'd written, "Understanding your ground isn't just about survival. It's about controlling the battle before it begins." The morning first pot of coffee brews as she studies his diagrams of the old mining roads that honeycombed the valley. Thomas had mapped every tunnel, every access point, noting how they could serve as either vulnerability or advantage. Now, watching Rising Storm's vehicles move with increasing frequency along those same routes, Margaret understands why her husband spent so many weekends exploring those abandoned passages. A knock at the door interrupts her studying. Sarah Watson, the local veterinarian, stands on the porch with poorly concealed distress evident in her posture. They came to the clinic last night, she says, without preamble, accepting the coffee Margaret offers. Said they needed a facility for their transportation business. When I refused, they made it clear that animal accidents can happen very easily on Mountain Road. Margaret notes the bruises on Sarah's wrist, carefully hidden beneath her jacket sleeve. Did Sheriff Crawford take a report? He said, "Without witnesses, there's nothing he can do." Sarah's voice carries bitter resignation. "But that's not why I'm here. Last night, while they were threatening me, I saw something in their truck, military-grade cases, the kind used for weapons transport. And one of them, the way he moved, talked, he knew things about Thomas's last mission that weren't in any public record." The revelation settles like ice in Margaret's stomach. Thomas's final deployment had been classified, its details hidden behind redacted documents and official silence. The only thing she'd been told was that he died ensuring his entire team made it home, and that some of the people he'd fought against had survived to seek revenge. Through the kitchen window, Margaret spots two motorcycles parked at the end of her drive, their riders maintaining casual observation. Their presence has become more overt, more intimidating, but she recognizes the pattern from Thomas's teachings. They establishing dominance. He'd explained during their training sessions, predators start with psychological pressure, making their targets feel helpless. Isolated, that's when most people break, but it's also when they're most predictable. Sarah Margaret says quietly, "That storage unit I mentioned, it's time." She writes a key code on a slip of paper. "Go to Mountain View Storage Unit 217. Inside, you'll find a laptop. Bring it here. But take the back roads." And Sarah, "Thank you for being brave enough to come forward." After the veterinarian departs, Margaret returns to Thomas's notebook, finding a section titled Counter Surveillance. His precise handwriting details methods for tracking hostile observers while appearing unaware, skills he'd insisted she practice until they became instinct. Now, as she begins her morning ranch work, she puts those lessons to use. The bikers maintain their watch as she tends to the cattle, repair fences, performs all the normal tasks of ranch life, but through carefully placed mirrors and strategic positioning, she catalogs their patterns, their rotations, the way they communicate with hidden hand signals that confirm her suspicions about their military background. Her phone buzzes with a text from Jack Bennett. 3 more properties sold this morning. Henderson's Reeves family, Old Miller Place. They're closing, and Margaret sends a coded acknowledgement and another protocol Thomas had established. She thinks about the families being forced out, generations of ranchers who'd weathered every hardship except this kind of calculated intimidation. Thomas had taught her that true strength isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about standing up for those who can't stand up For themselves, a black SUV approaches the ranch different from the usual surveillance vehicles. Through her spotting scope, Margaret observes 4 men in tactical clothing emerge. Their movement discipline coordinated. Their leader stops to speak with the bikers, and even from this distance, she recognizes the cold deficiency in his bearing. These aren't just criminals, they're trained operators, using their skills for intimidation. Inside the barn, Margaret opens a hidden panel Thomas had installed. Revealing a secure satellite phone, she enters a memorized number, one of many contingency plans her husband had put in place. Authentication code Whiskey 7. She speaks quietly. When the line connects, need background check on Rising Storm MC. Priority focus on military connections and personnel with links to Operation Shadowfall. The response is immediate. Professional confirmed data. Incoming. Be advised. Multiple red flags on recent Rising Storm activities. Similar patterns detected in 3 other locations, all centered on former Special Operations personnel. Margaret ends a call. Mind processing implications. Rising Storm isn't just trying to take her ranch, they're systematically targeting locations connected to Special Operations veterans. The question is why, and what does it have to do with Thomas's last mission? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the ranch as Sarah Watson returns with a laptop from the storage unit. Her truck bears fresh scratches along its side, evidence of an encounter she hasn't mentioned. Yet Margaret recognizes a determined set of her friends' shoulders. Something has changed during her trip into town. Rising Storm's enforcer was at the feed store, Sarah reports, setting the computer on the kitchen table. Her hands tremble slightly, but her voice remains steady. They're not even trying to hide their intimidation anymore. Old man Thompson tried to stand up to them when they started threatening his granddaughter. They broke his arm right there in front of everyone. Sheriff Crawford just stood by, claimed didn't see anything. Margaret powers up the laptop, entering the complex sequence of passwords Thomas had made her memorize. She recalls his patience as he taught her the importance of cybersecurity, his voice gentle but insistent. The digital battlefield is just as important as the physical one. Maggie, sometimes the best weapon isn't a gun, he'd explained during their training sessions. It's information. Knowing your enemy better than they know themselves. Knowledge properly applied can prevent conflicts before they start. The screen fills with encrypted files, each meticulously organized with Thomas's characteristic attention to detail. The first folder contains detailed surveillance photos of the Valley's mining network, annotated with observations that reveal her husband's deeper purpose. He discovered patterns that others had missed: suspicious vehicle movements during odd hours, unauthorized construction in abandoned shaft, signs that someone was using the tunnel system for something far more sinister than their legitimate mining claims suggested. I'm seeing similar activities at other locations connected to former Special Operations personnel. His notes read, someone's building something big using legitimate businesses as cover. The pattern suggests professional organization, military precision. They're establishing infrastructure for something that requires secrecy. Remote locations and easy access to transportation routes. A message arrives on the secure satellite phone. Detailed backgrounds on Rising Storm's leadership that confirm Margaret's growing suspicions. Their core members aren't just criminals with military experience. They're former Special Operations contractors, men who'd worked alongside Thomas on classified mission, men who'd been present during Operation Shadowfall, the mission that had claimed her husband's life. Sarah, Margaret says, quietly studying her friend's expression, I need you to tell me exactly what that enforcer said about Thomas's last mission. Every detail matters. The veterinarian sinks into a kitchen chair, her professional composure finally cracking. He was drunk, showing off to his crew, said something about unfinished business from Dubai that Thomas had interrupted. Something important, that his death wasn't the accident. Everyone believes. She meets Margaret's gaze directly. He said they were just waiting for the right moment to complete the operation. That's when he saw me listening, and she pushes up her sleeve, revealing dark bruises in the shape of fingerprints. Through the window, Margaret spots more motorcycles gathering at her property line. Their formation shifted from casual observation to tactical positioning. She recognizes the change from Thomas's lessons about escalating threat patterns. They're moving from intimidation to direct action. She murmurs, remembering his words about how predators reveal their intentions through Subtle changes in behavior, they're not just after the ranch. Are they? Sarah's voice carries growing understanding this is about whatever Thomas uncovered in Dubai. Margaret opens another encrypted file, this one requiring a password. She'd hoped never to use the date of Thomas's death. The screen fills with operational details. He'd hidden away insurance against the very situation now unfolding. Operation Shadowfall had been classified as a routine security detail for a diplomatic mission. But Thomas had discovered something darker, evidence that's certain. Contractors were selling classified intelligence using their military connections to facilitate weapons trafficking through seemingly legitimate business operations. He died ensuring this evidence reached the right authorities. Margaret explained, scanning pages of data that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. But some of the conspirators escaped justice. They're not just targeting me every property, they've seized every ranch they've taken there. All connected to veterans who might have known about the operation. They're eliminating potential threats while building their new network. Sarah's phone buzzes with an urgent text from Jack Bennett, making both women jump. Military-grade trucks moving through the old mining roads, heavy equipment. Something big is happening. Margaret's tactical training kicks in as she processes this information. Pieces falling into place. The Rising Storm MC isn't just a criminal organization, they're the visible face of something bigger, their legitimate business. Ventures provide cover for former contractors to rebuild their illegal operations using intimidation and violence to secure key properties, while eliminating potential witnesses. A truck appears on the horizon, Jack Bennett's vehicle approaching at high speed, dust billowing behind it. Through her spotting scope, Margaret spots 3 bikes. In pursuit, their riders' posture suggesting imminent violence. This isn't their usual intimidation pattern. Something has changed. Sarah get the medical kit from the barn, she orders, already moving toward the hidden gun safe. Then contact everyone you trust in town. It's time to remind them what Thomas always said. The true courage isn't about being fearless, it's about standing together when everything seems darkest. As she retrieves the weapons Thomas had prepared, Margaret remembers his most important lesson delivered on their last night. Together, true strength isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. He'd said, holding her close, it's about standing up when others back down. It's about fighting not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't fight for themselves. And sometimes, Maggie, it's about showing others that they're stronger than they believe. Jack's truck skids to a stop in the ranch yard, dust billowing as the pursuing bikes circle like predators. Through the window, Margaret spots something in his passenger seat. Documents, maps, what looks like photographic evidence. He's found something that's made Rising Storm break their pattern of gradual intimidation. Time to show them why you train me so well. Thomas, Margaret whispers, checking her weapons with practiced efficiency. Because Rising Storm is about to learn that some widows don't just grieve, they honor their fallen by continuing their fight for justice. And sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who threatens loudly, but the one who has spent years preparing quietly, guided by the wisdom of a warrior who saw trouble coming long before it arrived. Jack Bennett staggers from his truck, clutching a leather portfolio, his weathered face marked with fresh bruises. Margaret moves with practiced efficiency, covering his approach, while Sarah helps him inside. The pursuing motorcycles maintain their perimeter, their riders speaking urgently into radio headsets. Through her spotting scope, Margaret observes more vehicles approaching from the north, expensive SUVs with blacked-out windows, the kind Thomas had taught her to associate with private security contractors. Found these in the old mining office. Jack manages between labored breaths as Sarah tends to his injuries. They didn't think anyone would check the sealed records room. Shipping manifest, construction permits, personnel files. They're not just buying properties, they're building something big. Margaret scans the documents while maintaining awareness of the growing threat outside. The paperwork reveals a complex network of shell companies, all leading back to a familiar name, Aegis Strategic Solutions. Her breath catches. She recognizes the company from Thomas's files. They were the private military contractors involved in Operation Shadowfall, the ones whose illegal activities her husband had discovered. They're creating a corridor. She realizes, studying transportation routes highlighted on the maps, yellowing the old mining tunnels to connect key properties. The ranch seizures, the intimidation. It's all about controlling specific access points. Her tactical training kicks in as she processes the implications. They're rebuilding their smuggling network right here in Wind River Valley. Through the window, she spots Rising Storm's leader, Marcus Snake Wilson, dismounting his bike. His movements carry military precision. Despite his attempt to project casual menace, 2 more SUVs arrive, disgorging men in tactical clothing who take up strategic positions around the property. Their deployment pattern confirms her analysis. These aren't ordinary criminals, they're trained operators. Executing a planned operation, Jack, Margaret asks, quietly, what made them chase you? What else did you find? The old rancher pulls a USB drive from his boot traffic camera footage from the county line military trucks, weapon shipments, all using the routes they've been clearing. But that's not what spooked him. His hands tremble slightly as he inserts the drive into Thomas's laptop. This was hidden in the back of the records room security. Footage from Dubai dated the night Thomas died. The screen fills with grainy video showing a familiar corridor Margaret forces herself to watch. As the scene unfolds, Thomas discovering documents in an office's confrontation with Aegis contractors, the firefight that followed. But the footage continues past what the official report had described. It shows Thomas wounded, but moving with purpose, securing evidence before his final encounter with Snake Wilson, then an Aegis team leader they lied. Sarah whispers, watching the truth of that night, finally revealed the official story was a cover-up. Margaret finishes, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Thomas didn't die in a random accident. He sacrificed himself, making sure this evidence survived, evidence that would expose Aegis's entire operation. A motorcycle engine revs outside, demanding attention. Snake Wilson stands in her driveway, projecting the same false confidence she remembers from the footage. Mrs. Foster's voice carries practiced charm, masking predatory intent. We need to discuss your property's future, and perhaps some other matters that should have died in Dubai. Margaret studies his position through carefully placed mirrors, noting how his men have established a tactical perimeter. Their deployment is professional, but predictable, exactly the kind of approach Thomas had trained her to counter. They expect to find a grieving widow, someone they can intimidate into submission. Instead, they're about to learn why Thomas Foster spent years preparing his wife for exactly this kind of confrontation. Sarah, Margaret speaks quietly while maintaining watch on the increasing force outside. Remember the veterinary clinic's basement, the one Thomas helped renovate. She meets her friend's eyes, seeing understanding dawn. It's time to put it to use. Get everyone there, Jack. The Thompson family, anyone else they've threatened. The clinic's entrance connects to the old mining tunnels. You're not coming, Sarah asks, helping Jack toward the back door. Not yet. Margaret retrieves a satellite phone from its hidden compartment. Thomas left contingency plans, people who need to see what Jack found. But first, she checks her weapons with practiced efficiency, remembering Thomas' lessons about controlling the battlefield. First, I need to remind Snake Wilson why some predators should be more careful about the prey they choose. Through her spotting scope, she observes more forces arriving, rising storm members mixed with professional contractors, all positioning themselves for what they expect to be a simple intimidation operation. They don't realize they're walking into a trap, years in the making, moving exactly as Thomas had predicted. Such men would you taught me well, my love, Margaret whispers, activating the surveillance system Thomas had installed throughout the property time to show them that true strength isn't about having the most weapons or the biggest force. She begins implementing the defense plans they had prepared together, her movements precise and purposeful. Sometimes it's about being the quiet one, the PTI patient one, the one they never see coming until it's too late, as Snake Wilson and his forces establish their perimeter around the Foster ranch. Margaret activates the property's hidden security measures. Thomas had designed a system with characteristic thoroughness, cameras concealed in weathered fence posts, motion sensors disguised as irrigation equipment, surveillance gear that appears to be nothing more than normal ranch maintenance tools in asymmetric warfare. He taught her the key isn't matching your opponent's strength, it's making them waste their strength while playing to your advantages. Through her command center hidden beneath the barn's reinforced floor, Margaret monitors multiple feeds showing rising storms deployment. Their formation is professional but predictable, following standard military protocols. For surrounding a target, they've positioned snipers on the ridge line, deployment teams that key approach points, and communication specialists coordinating their movements. Everything proceeding according to their planned operation. Everything proceeding exactly as Thomas had anticipated. They would. Her satellite phone buzzes with an encrypted message from one of her husband's old contacts. Intel confirmed Aegis Strategic Solutions, showing major activity, multiple weapon shipments tracked to Wine River region, high-level personnel mobilized, and you've got their attention. Margaret allows herself a grim smile, remembering Thomas's lessons about the psychology of overconfident opponents. The most dangerous adversaries, he had explained, are often the ones who think they're in complete control. They follow procedures, they trust deploy tactics that have always worked before. That's when they miss the subtle signs that they're walking into a trap. Outside, Snake Wilson's voice carries across the ranch yard with practiced authority. Mrs. Foster, my associates are growing impatient. Perhaps we should discuss the situation like reasonable people. After all, we are not the monsters your husband painted us. As in his final report, Margaret studies his position through the surveillance system. His casual stance betrays no sign that he was the one who gave the order in Dubai, the one whose actions led to Thomas's sacrifice. But she recognizes the subtle tells of a man used to wielding power. Through fear, a man who's forgotten that true strength often comes wrapped in unexpected packages. Her computer alerts her to incoming data, detailed profiles of every operator currently surrounding her ranch. Thomas's networks are still active, still loyal to the man who had earned their trust through years of honorable service. The files reveal what she suspected. These aren't just random criminals or hired muscle. They're former special operations personnel who followed Snake into the private sector, men who traded their oaths for profit. Final warning. Mrs. Foster, Snake calls out his false charm, cracking slightly. Don't make us do this the hard way. Your husband already showed us how that ends. Margaret accesses another system. Thomas had prepared remote controls for the ranch's infrastructure. Actually, she responds through the external speakers, letting her voice carry the quiet confidence Thomas had cultivated in her. I don't think you understand how this ends at all. With precise keystrokes, she initiates the first phase of Thomas's defense protocols. Suddenly, the ranch's irrigation systems activate, but not with water. Industrial-grade smoke begins filling strategic areas, disrupting the sniper's sight lines and forcing the ground teams to adjust their positions. Their professional training works against them as they fall back to predetermined rally points, exactly the locations Thomas had predicted they would choose. Impressive trick. Snake's voice carries force amusement, but smoke won't stop what's coming. You're only delaying the inevitable. No. Margaret responds calmly, watching through the imaging as her opponents move exactly where she wants them. I'm teaching you what Thomas tried to tell you in Dubai, that sometimes the biggest mistake is underestimating what one person will do to protect what matters. Her fingers dance across the keyboard, activating the next phase. Buried speakers begin broadcasting specific frequencies, the kind that play havoc with tactical radio communications. The coordinated operation begins to fragment as teams lose contact with each other, forced to rely on hand signals and preset protocols. Through her surveillance feeds, Margaret observes the rising frustration in their movements. These men are used to being the predators, used to having superior force and technology on their side. They've forgotten Thomas's most important lesson, that true victory often goes not to the strongest, but to the most prepared. You know what Thomas's real legacy is? She broadcasts, watching Snake's composure crack slightly. Not just the evidence he died protecting, not just the networks he built or the plans he made. His legacy is teaching others that standing up to people like you isn't about matching your firepower. It's about being smarter, more patient, more committed to what's right. Her monitors show more vehicles approaching. Reinforcements. Snake called in when his initial intimidation failed, but Margaret allows herself a small smile, remembering Thomas's words about the power of proper preparation, because while Snake's forces focus on surrounding her ranch, they haven't noticed the real operation taking place right under their feet in the old mining tunnels beneath Wind River Valley. Sarah Watson leads a growing group of townspeople through passages Thomas had secretly reinforced years ago. Jack Bennett's evidence is already being transmitted to multiple federal agencies and in secure facilities across the country. People who owed Thomas Foster their lives are mobilizing, preparing to expose the full scope of Aegis' illegal operations. Snake Wilson thinks he's about to eliminate a loose end from Dubai. Instead, he's about to learn why Thomas Foster spent years preparing his wife for this exact moment. Because sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the most weapons or the biggest team. Sometimes it's the quiet one, the patient one, The one who knows the true strength lies not in dominating others, but in standing firm when everything seems darkest. The command center's monitors cast a blue glow across Margaret's face. As she tracks multiple threats converging on her position, Snake Wilson's reinforcements arrive in waves, 3 tactical teams approaching from the north, 2 more securing the RE line, while Rising Storm members establish a tight perimeter around the property. Their coordination would be impressive if it wasn't exactly what Thomas had predicted they would do. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Mrs. Foster Snake's voice carries calculated menace through her speakers. "We know about the tunnels, we know about the evidence. Did you really think Tomas was the only one who could plan ahead?" Margaret studies the thermal imaging displays, showing movement in the mining network beneath her feet. Snake's teams are indeed entering the tunnel system, but their confidence betrays their ignorance. Thomas hadn't just mapped those passages, he had transformed them into an intricate defensive network, turning the valley's geology itself into a weapon. Her satellite phone lights up with an encrypted message from Sarah. "Everyone's safe at the clinic. Federal teams moving into position." But Margaret, they're not just looking for Jack's evidence. Overheard their radio chatter. They're searching for something called Project Echo. The name sends a chill through Margaret's spine. She accesses a hidden partition on Thomas's laptop, finding a folder he'd specifically prepared for this contingency. The files reveal the true scope of what her husband Band had uncovered in Dubai. Aegis wasn't just running weapons, they were developing experimental military technology, using their private military contracts as cover for something much darker. Project EO was supposed to die with your husband. Snake broadcasts his false charm replaced by cold deficiency. Those records, that prototype, he found they're worth more than this whole valley, worth more than all the lives of these ranchers you're trying to protect. Through her surveillance network, Margaret observes Snake's operators deploying specialized equipment, electronic warfare gear, signal detection systems, the kind of hardware that goes beyond normal private security operations. They're searching for something specific, something they believe Thomas had hidden on the property. "You know what Thomas told me about men like you." Margaret responds, her voice carrying the quiet strength her husband had nurtured, that you're so focused on having the best weapons, the most advanced technology, that you forget the most powerful weapon is here. She taps her temple, remembering Thomas's lessons about the psychology of combat, the mind that stays calm when others panic, the will that stands firm when others break. Her monitors show Snake's teams breaching the outer tunnel network, moving with professional precision through passages they believe they control, but Thomas had spent years preparing these underground spaces, installing systems that would turn an invader's strength against them. With careful keystrokes, Margaret begins activating those preparations. Suddenly, electronic interference fills the tunnels, disrupting Snake's tactical communications. Emergency bulkheads seal specific sections, separating his forces into manageable groups. The ventilation system Thomas had modified begins cycling air in carefully calculated patterns, making it impossible to use thermal imaging or advanced sensors effectively. Impressive setup, Snake acknowledges, but Margaret detects growing frustration in his tone. "Thomas taught you well, but you're still one woman against an army. You can't protect everyone forever." "That's where you're wrong," Margaret responds, watching through her cameras as confusion spreads through the enemy ranks. "Thomas didn't just teach me to fight, he taught me that true strength comes from inspiring others to stand up against people like you." Her words prove prophetic as new signals appear on her tactical display across Wind River Valley. Lights begin flickering on in ranch houses, and small business trucks start moving along back roads, carrying families and vital supplies to safe locations Thomas had established years ago. The community isn't running in fear, they're executing evacuation plans. Sarah and Jack had quietly prepared them for your men in town might want to stand down. Margaret continues, allowing herself a small smile. These ranchers may not be special forces, but they know every inch of this land, and they're done being afraid. Through her monitors, she watches Snake's carefully planned operation begin to unravel. His teams in the tunnels report increasing difficulties as hidden defense mechanisms activate. The sophisticated equipment they brought to locate Project Echo's prototype proves useless against the electronic countermeasures Thomas had installed. "You're making a mistake," Snake warns, but his composure shows cracks. "You have no idea what that prototype can do, what kind of power you're playing with." Actually, Margaret responds, accessing another system Thomas had prepared I know exactly what Project Echo is, and more importantly, I know why my husband gave his life to keep it out of your hands or fingers, move across the keyboard with practiced precision, implementing the next phase of Thomas's defense plan. Throughout the valley, hidden speakers begin broadcasting a specific frequency, one that perfectly matches the resonant frequency of the crystalline formations in the old mining tunnels. Thomas wasn't just a soldier, Margaret explains, watching Snake's forces react to the growing vibrations. He was an engineer. He studied this valley's geology for years, understanding exactly how sound waves would travel through these rocks, how they could be used to protect something worth dying for. The tunnels begin to sing with carefully calculated harmonics, making it impossible for Snake's teams to maintain their coordination. Equipment malfunctions, communications fail, and the very ground seems to work against them. They're experiencing firsthand why Thomas Foster had chosen this specific valley, this precise location, to make his last stand. This is your final warning, Margaret broadcasts, her voice carrying absolute certainty. You can retreat now, face justice for Dubai, or learn exactly what happens when you threaten a community protected by a legacy of true courage. The resonant frequency continues to build throughout the tunnel system as Margaret accesses the final set of files Thomas had prepared about Project Echo. The documents reveal a technological breakthrough that would have revolutionized military communications, a quantum entanglement device that could transmit information instantaneously across any distance, completely secure from interception. In the wrong hands, it would give its possessor an insurmountable advantage in both warfare and corporate espionage. Thomas discovered they were weaponizing it. She reads from his encrypted notes, turning a communication system into something that could remotely disable any electronic device, potentially devastating entire cities' infrastructure. That's when he knew he had to stop them, had to ensure the prototype never reached production. Her surveillance feeds show Snake's forces regrouping, abandoning the compromised tunnels for new positions around the ranch. Their sophisticated equipment, rendered useless by the resonant frequencies, gets replaced with more basic tactical gear here. Through her thermal imaging, Margaret observes Snake conferring with his senior operators, their body language suggesting growing frustration. Your husband was a fool. Snake's voice carries genuine anger. Now that prototype could have revolutionized American military superiority. Instead, he let idealism cloud his judgment, got himself killed trying to play hero. Margaret's hands tighten on her keyboard, but she maintains her composure. Just as Thomas had taught her, he understood something you forgot, Snake, that true patriotism isn't about having the biggest weapons or the most advanced technology. It's about standing up for the principles that make America worth fighting for. Her satellite phone lights up with an urgent message from Sarah. Federal Task Force confirms Aegis activities at 3 other locations, similar pattern targeting veterans' properties, using local corruption for cover. But Margaret, there's more. The task force found evidence of prototype testing entire towns. In remote areas, their power grids mysteriously failing. They're already using an early version of the technology. The implications chill Margaret to her core. This isn't just about one piece of stolen military hardware. Snake's organization is actively deploying prototypes, testing their weapons capabilities on innocent communities. Through her monitors, she watches more Aegis reinforcements arrive, not just tactical teams now, but specialized technical units, carrying equipment she recognizes from Thomas's files. You think you're protecting people, Snake broadcasts, his voice carrying cold certainty, but you're just delaying the inevitable progress. Doesn't care about your moral stand. The technology exists, someone will develop it, deploy it, profit from it. At least we're Americans, better us than our enemies. That's the difference between you and Thomas. Margaret responds, activating another layer of defenses. He understood that some lines shouldn't be crossed no matter who's doing the crossing. That's why he designed this entire setup, not just to protect the prototype, but to ensure it could never be reproduced. Her words are muted by new alarms on her tactical display. Snake's technical teams have begun scanning the ranch with advanced sensors, searching for the quantum signature that would reveal the prototype's location. But Thomas had prepared for this too, installing a network of quantum decoys throughout the property. Each one appears identical to the real prototype on their instruments, creating a web of false positives that makes precise location impossible possible. Clever, Snake acknowledges, but we have time and numbers on our side. We'll find it eventually. In all These brave ranchers, you're trying to protect their families, their homes. How long? Can you really keep them safe? Margaret allows herself a small smile, remembering Thomas's lessons about the power of community. I don't have to protect them forever, Snake. Just long enough for them to remember who they really are, to remember that tyranny only works when good people choose to stay silent. Her monitors show movement throughout the valley, not retreat, but coordination. Ranch trucks position themselves on strategic back roads. Hunting rifles emerge from family gun safes. Farmers and ranchers begin taking up positions they've quietly practiced. Following plans, Sarah and Jack help distribute this community. Hasn't just been hiding, they've been preparing. You're not the only one who can build a network. Margaret continues, watching Snake's expression change as he notices the shifting tactical situation. Thomas spent years helping this valley get ready for people like you, not by making them soldiers, but by reminding them that true strength comes from standing together. A new alert flashes on her screen. Data from long-range sensors Thomas had placed throughout the region. More Aegis forces are inbound, including heavy transport vehicles carrying what appears to be portable power generation equipment. They're preparing for a major operation, likely planning to deploy their prototype weapon against the entire valley's infrastructure. Final warning, Snake announces, all pretense of negotiation gone. Surrender the prototype, where we demonstrate exactly what this technology can do. Your neighbors' farms, their homes, their livelihoods, everything that requires electricity becomes collateral damage. How many lives is your moral stand worth? Margaret's response carries the quiet conviction Thomas had nurtured in her. How many lives is your greed worth, Snake? Because you're about to learn what Thomas knew, that sometimes the greatest power isn't in the weapons we possess, but in the principles we're willing to defend. As Snake's forces position their power generation equipment around the valley, Margaret receives confirmation from her long-range sensors. The technology they're deploying matches Thomas's classified reports about Project Echo's infrastructure disruption capabilities. Each unit capable of generating targeted electromagnetic pulses that could disable electronics within a 2 m range radius. Together, they could effectively shut down the entire valley's power grid, communications, and critical systems. Sarah Margaret speaks into her secure channel status report on the community preparations. Better than we hoped comes the response. Remember how Thomas insisted every ranch install those old diesel generators, the ones not connected to the main power grid. They're all operational. Emergency radio networks, active medical supplies distributed. Every family implementing their designated contingency plans through her surveillance network. Margaret observes Snake's technical teams establishing their attack positions. Their confidence suggests they don't realize Thomas had spent years preparing this community for exactly this type of technological warfare. Every major ranch equipped with autonomous power systems, critical infrastructure protected by specialized Faraday cages, emergency communication protocols that don't rely on modern electronics. You seem awfully calm for someone about to watch their neighbors' livelihoods get destroyed. Snake's voice carries practice menace. Last chance to surrender the prototype before we demonstrate its power. Margaret's response reflects the quiet strength Thomas had cultivated in her. You still don't understand what you're really facing, do you? This isn't just about protecting one piece of technology. This is about standing up to people who think their power gives them the right to threaten innocent lives. Her monitors show increased activity in the valley as the community's preparation becomes visible. Ranch hands moving livestock to sheltered locations, families activating backup power systems, local hunting groups taking up defensive positions along strategic ridgelines, not as tactical operators, but as people defending their homes with intimate knowledge of every trail and vantage point. Their civilian. Snake dismisses farmers and ranchers playing at being soldiers. They have no idea what they're up against. Actually, Margaret counters, watching her tactical display light up with new signals. They know exactly what they're facing because Thomas didn't just help them prepare physically, he helped them understand that true courage isn't about having the most advanced weapons, it's about being willing to stand together against those who would use fear to control others. Through her tactical display, she observes more of Snake's forces in the valley's prepared defenses, each team finding that their military training and advanced technology count for less against defenders who understand their land, work together, and refuse to be intimidated. In the command center beneath the barn, Margaret's tactical displays light up with new alert. Snake's forces have begun a coordinated push across multiple sectors their movement, suggesting they've identified what they believe to be the prototype's location through her surveillance network. She observes their technical teams deploying more sophisticated detection equipment devices that combine quantum sensors with traditional signal analysis. They're using some kind of hybrid tracking system, Sarah reports. Through their secure channel different from their previous attempts, these readings are getting closer to actual quantum signatures, not just the decoy patterns we've been generating. Margaret accesses a hidden section of Thomas's files, one she'd hoped wouldn't be necessary. The documents reveal that he had anticipated this development, understanding that eventually someone would develop technology capable of cutting through their defensive measures. But as always, his preparation went deeper than anyone suspected. Margaret speaks quietly into her comm unit. Remember when Thomas insisted on teaching advanced physics to the high school science club, all those lectures about quantum mechanics and signal propagation? Of course, Sarah responds the kids loved it. He made complex theories seem practical, especially when he connected them to real-world applications like radio communications and electronic systems. He wasn't just teaching science, Margaret explains, her fingers moving across the keyboard to activate new systems. He was preparing the next generation of defenders, those students who went on to work in local communications, power management, technical services. They all understand exactly how quantum signals behave in this environment. Now, through her monitor, she watches as those former students, now valued members of the community, begin implementing countermeasures they'd practiced without realizing their true purpose. Local radio operators adjust their broadcasting frequencies in precise patterns. Power station technicians modify grid configurations in ways that create specific electromagnetic fields, each small change contributing to a sophisticated defense network built on fundamental scientific principles, detecting multiple interference patterns. One of Snake's technical advisor reports frustration evident in his voice. The quantum signature are being masked by some kind of coordinated electromagnetic activity. It's just like the whole valley is working as one giant countermeasure system. Snake's response carries cold fury. Impossible. No civilian infrastructure could generate this kind of sophisticated quantum interference unless his voice trails. Offers understanding dawns unless someone spent years preparing for this exact scenario, planning, teaching, building a defense that doesn't rely on military technology, but on basic scientific principles. Anyone could learn. Margaret allows herself a moment of pride in her husband's foresight. Thomas understood something you've forgotten. She broadcasts that true security doesn't come from having the most advanced technology. It comes from empowering people with knowledge, helping them understand how to protect what matters using principles that can't be blocked or jammed or overcome with brute force or surveillance. Feeds show Snake's forces encountering increasing difficulty as they attempt to track the prototype's quantum signature. Their sophisticated equipment, designed to cut through normal interference, proves less effective against a defense network based on coordinated application of basic physics. Each time they adjust their approach, the community's technical experts modify their countermeasures, applying lessons Thomas had taught them years ago. You've turned the whole valley into some kind of quantum defense system. Snake observes a hint of grudging respect entering his voice. Every power line, every radio tower, every piece of electronic equipment working together to hide that prototype. But you've also shown your hand now. We know what to target through her tactical display. Margaret watches Snake's teams begin repositioning, clearly preparing to systematically eliminate the infrastructure supporting their defense network. But Thomas had prepared for this contingency, as well, understanding that eventually any sophisticated defense would need to be protected by something simpler, more fundamental. You still don't understand what you're really facing, Margaret responds, initiating the next phase of their defense. This isn't just about protecting technology or infrastructure. It's about something more basic, something Thomas spent years teaching this community throughout the valley. Carefully prepared positions become active. Local engineers implement contingency systems designed to operate without central coordination. Power grid technicians activate backup networks that can function independently. Communication specialists switch to alternative methods that don't rely on vulnerable infrastructure. Even if you shut down every power station, disable every radio tower, destroy every piece of electronic equipment in This Valley Margaret continues, "You still won't break our defense, because Thomas taught us that true resilience isn't about maintaining sophisticated systems. It's about understanding fundamental principles that can't be taken away." Her monitors show the growing frustration in Snake's forces as they realize the true nature of what they're facing. Each attempt to disable the community's infrastructure reveals another layer of preparation. Another example of how basic scientific knowledge properly applied can counter even the most advanced military technology. As Snake's forces prepare to target the valley's infrastructure, Margaret receives an urgent alert from her perimeter sensors. 3 black SUVs approach from the county line, their diplomatic plates and professional security escorts suggesting high-level involvement. Through her surveillance network, she observes a familiar figure emerging from the lead vehicle, Colonel James Mitchell, former military intelligence, now a senior executive with Aegis Strategic Solutions. "Your defense is impressive, Mrs. Foster." Mitchell's voice carries practice authority as he joins Snake at the command position. "Thomas always did think several steps ahead, but you should understand what you're really dealing with. Project Echo isn't just another military prototype. Its quantum communication capabilities could revolutionize global intelligence gathering. Think of the lives that could be saved, the threats that could be prevented." Margaret studies Mitchell's bearing through her monitors, recognizing the subtle tells Thomas had taught her to watch for. "You mean think of the power it would give people like you." She responds, "The ability to intercept any communication, disable any security system, control any electronic infrastructure." Thomas saw how you were planning to use it. That's why he made sure it would never leave this valley. Her tactical displays show Mitchell security teams deploying with professional precision, integrating with Snake's existing forces, but they move with a hesitation that suggests uncertainty. Their traditional military training, encountering defenses that don't follow conventional patterns. Sarah Margaret signals through their secure channel, implement Thomas's Contingency 7, just like he taught in those emergency response drills throughout the valley. A new layer of defense activates local emergency services. Personnel trained through programs Thomas had helped develop begin executing carefully prepared protocols. Ambulances and fire trucks position themselves at strategic locations. Their presence creating zones where aggressive military action becomes politically complicated. "You're using civilian emergency services as tactical assets." Mitchell observes a note of reluctant admiration in his voice, making it impossible for us to take direct action without risking public backlash. "Thomas taught you well. He taught all of us," Margaret corrects, watching through her cameras as more community members join the defensive effort. Not just about tactics or technology, but about what's worth protecting, about standing up to people who think their power gives them the right to control others. Her satellite phone lights up with an encrypted message from one of Thomas's old contacts. "Federal Task Force confirms Mitchell's involvement in Dubai operation. Evidence suggests high-level cover-up. Aegis isn't just after the prototype, they're eliminating witnesses to previous operations." The revelation confirms Margaret's suspicions about why they've targeted this specific community. It's not just about acquiring Project Echo's technology. They're systematically removing everyone who might know the truth about their past activities, using the prototype as justification for their "Your husband was idealistic." Mitchell continues, his tone suggesting reasonableness. He saw the potential for abuse without considering the benefits. "We're not the enemies he painted us as. We're patriots trying to protect American interests in an increasingly dangerous world." Through her command center, Margaret activates another system Thomas had prepared. Suddenly hidden speakers throughout the valley begin broadcasting recorded conversations, evidence Thomas had gathered about Aegis's true activities. Mitchell's own voice discussing unauthorized weapon sales, planned accidents for whistleblower strategies for manipulating military contracts. "Patriots don't sell weapons to America's enemies." Margaret responds, watching Mitchell's composure crack slightly. "They don't arrange accidents for soldiers who discover the truth." Thomas understood something you've forgotten, that true patriotism isn't about power or profit. It's about standing up for the principles that make America worth defending. Her monitors show increasing tension among Snake's forces as they hear their leaders' true nature exposed. Some operators begin showing hesitation, their military training conflicting with the realization that they're not fighting for the cause they believed in. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Foster," Mitchell warns, But uncertainty edges his voice. These recordings as evidence. It could destabilize critical military operations, put American lives at risk. The only thing at risk is your organization's criminal empire, Margaret counters, initiating the next phase of Thomas's plan throughout the Valley. More hidden systems active AC. At emergency broadcast networks begin transmitting specific frequencies that interfere with EG's tactical communications, while strengthening the community's coordination. This is what real strength looks like. Colonel, she continues, watching the community's defense network adapt and strengthen, not in threatening others with superior force, but in standing together against those who would abuse their power. Thomas didn't just prepare us to protect the prototype. He prepared us to expose the truth about organizations like yours. The morning sun breaks through gathering storm clouds as Margaret's surveillance system detects new movement throughout the valley. Mitchell's arrival has changed the dynamic, transforming what began as a simple intimidation operation into something more complex. Through her command sense monitors, she observes several of Snake's junior operators engaging in hushed conversations, their body language suggesting growing conflict between duty and conscience. You've created quite a dilemma for some of our people. Mitchell acknowledges, his voice carrying calculated diplomacy. These recordings as evidence. It's making them question their mission. But you should understand the larger picture. The world isn't as simple as Thomas believed. Sometimes maintaining security requires difficult choices. Margaret's tactic Eichel display shows more Aegis reinforcements arriving, but their deployment lacks the previous coordination. Some teams hesitate before following orders, while others position themselves to maintain clear lines of retreat. The truth about their organization activities has introduced an element their military training never prepared them for: moral uncertainty. Sarah, Margaret signals through their secure channel activate Thomas's memorial protocol. Throughout the valley, a new network springs to life. Digital displays on public buildings, emergency broadcast systems, even electronic billboards begin showing photographs and documents, not military secrets or classified intelligence, but something more powerful, evidence of Thomas's real work in the community. Images appear of Thomas teaching veterans' children about electronics, helping elderly neighbors install security systems, organizing community emergency response training. Each picture accompanied by personal stories from Valley residents testifying to how one soldier chose to use his skills not for profit or power, but to strengthen his community. What you're seeing Margaret broadcast to all channels is the true legacy of a warrior, not in weapons or technology, but in helping others protect what matters. Thomas understood that real security isn't built through fear or control. It's built by empowering people to stand together against those who would threaten their way of life. Or monitors show the impact as more of Snake's operators watch their screens, seeing a different kind of strength than what their military training taught them. Some remove their tactical gear, stepping away from positions they had held moments ago. Others begin openly questioning orders, their professional discipline wavering in the face of undeniable truth. Their soldiers, Mitchell dismisses, but uncertainty edges his voice. Train to follow orders, not debate ethics. A few sentimental pictures won't change that. You're wrong, Margaret responds, activating another system Thomas had prepared. Their human beings, first warriors who signed up to protect others, not threaten in, and communities Thomas believed in. Their basic integrity. That's why he left them a choice through her surveillance network. She watches as hidden speakers throughout the valley begin broadcasting personal messages. Recordings Thomas had prepared before his death, his voice steady and confident, addresses individual operators by name, reminding them of their original oaths, the ideals that led them to military service. Martinez, Thomas's voice carries clear purpose. Remember what you told me in Dubai about why you enlisted, about wanting to protect communities like the one you grew up in. Look around you now. Look at what you're being ordered to do. Similar messages play across the valley, each targeting specific operators Thomas had known, had served with, had believed could remember their true purpose. Margaret watches through her cameras as hardened soldiers pause, weapons lowering, as they confront the distance between their current actions and their original ideals. He knew them. Mitchell realizes genuine surprise in his tone, not just as operators, but as people. He prepared messages for each one, believing some would still listen. Thomas understood. Something you've forgotten, Margaret responds, observing more Operators stepping away from their positions that true loyalty isn't about following orders blindly. It's about staying true to the principles that inspired you to serve in the first place. Her tactical display shows the operation beginning to fragment as individual soldiers make personal choices. Some maintain their positions, but cease aggressive actions. Others actively distance themselves from aegis leadership. A few approach local authorities ready to provide testimony about the organizations illegal activities. They'll be marked as traitors.